Beneath the outward tranquility of Banff National Park and its high mountains lies a number of mysterious stories involving disappearances. There have been numerous disappearances in this vast and tranquil area, and these cases raise many questions and speculations. Set against the backdrop of majestic landscapes, these incidents make us realize how blurred the lines between reality and the unknown can be. In February 2015, training sessions for search and rescue professionals were planned for Banff Park. This park is located in the Canadian Rocky Mountains, where conditions are quite dangerous in the winter. There are ice walls and difficult routes for climbers in the polar sector area. The training was organized to practice dealing with avalanches and other high-altitude emergencies. The weather at the time was unstable, with high winds, sudden temperature changes, and regular snowfall. Sergeant Mark Sales was often deployed to different countries and climates. He has been involved in high-altitude, tropical, and combat zone rescues. He has won awards for bravery and is noted for his ability to remain calm in critical circumstances. These qualities were considered particularly important for the upcoming exercise. Mark was tasked with checking the technical condition of the equipment and ensuring that all participants carried working search sensors, beepers. These beepers help locate a person under the snow in the event of an avalanche. Banff National Park has a long-standing practice of utilizing military experts for such training. The park staff worked with the Army to share their expertise. Mark scrutinized the weather forecast and reports of potential avalanches. There had already been several avalanches in that area in January. Some of the avalanches had been small, but one had been quite large and had blocked part of the hiking trail. All the instructors knew about it. However, in the winter of 2015, the command decided not to cancel the exercise, believing that the level of training of rescuers was high enough. No one expected the situation to get out of control. In the early morning of February 12, 2015, a group of rescuers began the ascent to the desired site. The goal was to practice rappelling down the ice slope and check radio transmitters in low visibility conditions. Wind speeds increased that day and temperatures were recorded very low, closer to minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit. Some team members reported warning signs. Faint crackling in the snow layer was heard in several locations. This often indicates that the internal structure of the snow layer is unstable. Mark was walking in a bundle along with Corporal Jeff Fraser. They were constantly double-checking how well their gear was secured. In such conditions, any mistake could cost lives. If a person's harness breaks or a safety rope comes loose, the slippery pavement leaves little chance of holding on. Plus, they considered the possibility of new avalanches, as snow had been accumulating on the steep slopes all week. By late afternoon, the wind had picked up. Mark radioed base camp to relay the situation. He was told to stay along the safe line and stay away from potentially dangerous cornices, but visibility deteriorated, and the group was unable to fully complete the training mission before darkness fell. Some rescuers had to find a place to wait out the weather, as it was unsafe to return down at night. Mark and Jeff still continued on toward a pre-marked point where a small supply cache was to be sheltered. The exact trigger of the avalanche was never determined. One theory is that a heavy block of ice fell from above and dislodged a larger mass of snow. The floes may have slid over old ice where the layer was particularly smooth. When the avalanche started moving, it reached tremendous speed. Mark and Jeff didn't immediately realize what was happening. At first, they thought it was a powerful gust of wind, but then they heard a muffled roar, and a snowfall came down the slope above, quickly becoming a raging torrent. Jeff tried to grab Mark's arm, but he couldn't. The avalanche swept over Mark, knocking him to the ground and carrying him downward. Small rocks, ice chunks, and sharp shards of rock were also pulled into the snowflow. The pressure of the snow mass can break bones, and the density of the snow after it stops is almost like wet concrete. In such cases, a person cannot move, and if the head is below the surface, there is a huge risk of suffocation. Jeff was lucky. He fell a little sideways and was able to grab onto a rock ledge. When the bulk of the snow was gone, he stayed on the surface and escaped serious injury with only bruises and abrasions. He called out to Mark, but no one answered. The snow was sloshing fast, and they had to act as quickly as possible because the victim had a limited amount of time to get air into his lungs. Jeff started calling for help on his radio, but the wind and interference in the mountains made communication unstable. Eventually, his signal was picked up at the bottom where several other rescuers were standing. They moved quickly to the top. Some of them walked, while others tried snowmobiles as far as the terrain allowed. But the paths to the avalanche cone were not easy. There could be ice under the snow, and there was a danger of secondary avalanches. The first search was conducted manually and with the help of avalanche feelers, which are long light pins used to pierce the snow in an attempt to find a body. Several dogs were released at the same time. However, immediately after an avalanche, the chances of finding a person alive are the highest, the first 15-20 minutes. Later, the probability decreases sharply. On the evening of February 12th, the weather conditions deteriorated even more. The lighting was poor, it was snowing thickly, and the group feared more avalanches. The search had to be stopped periodically in order not to put people and dogs at additional risk. On the morning of February 13th, the management of the operation decided to expand the search area. Technicians who knew how to secure the area came to the site. They used low-yield explosive charges to trigger the descent of potentially dangerous areas before people went there. This is standard procedure in avalanche-prone areas. But each detonation lifted more snow into the air and strong winds blew it around. This reduced visibility. The rescuers tried to coordinate their actions so as not to delay the search, but also to prevent the death of the team members. Canines led dogs on leashes because they could fall off the ledges or fall into cracks. The animals were also threatened with frostbite, and they were periodically taken to the base camp for heating. But the dogs persistently searched for at least a faint human scent under the thick layer of snow and ice. Sometimes they started scratching the ground with their paws, signaling that they smelled something. Rescuers rushed there with feelers, broke up the snow with shovels, but usually it turned out to be rocks or snags. In such conditions, it is difficult to determine the exact point. During the first 2 days of the search, we found several pieces of equipment. They found a broken-off part of a ski pole, a piece of a helmet, and a scrap of strong nylon fabric, similar to the upper part of a jacket. Later, they recovered a fragment of a safety harness with a broken buckle. On it were initials written in white marker, which is how Mark signed his gear. These finds made the rescuers hope that they were on the right path and that Mark himself might be somewhere nearby, but under the snow. However, the signal from the beeper, which should send a radio signal, no one has not caught. Because of the terrain, peculiarities of the waves could be distorted, and the batteries in the beeper in the cold lost power. Perhaps the device was damaged by rocks or snow pressure. This made the task very difficult. In the polar sector area, repeated snowfalls are common. Sometimes they are smaller in volume, but they can still swamp a search team or throw someone into a ravine. During February 13th and 14th, experts observed fresh cracks at the top of the ridge. These cracks indicated that the snow there was still unstable. As temperatures change, weak layers form inside the snow puff. Even a slight vibration can cause a new collapse. The people and equipment carrying out the search work create vibrations themselves. So we had to constantly assess the risks. Some rescuers suffered minor injuries from shoveling, falling on slippery ice, or experiencing symptoms of frostbite. Their hands and feet would go numb, and if their gloves got wet, their fingers would cramp. The medics on duty at the camp helped the frostbitten, but warned that it was dangerous to continue working in such a condition. As a result, shifts were changed, and some people were temporarily out of commission. Mark's mother, Liz Quinn, lived in another town. When she was notified of what had happened, she was distraught for a long time. She was told that Mark was missing in an avalanche, that a search was underway, but that the odds had dropped after the first few hours. Every day she received calls from the military unit, updating her on the progress of the operation, but there were no concrete results. She asked if the dogs could have made a mistake, if more people or equipment were needed. In response, she heard that all possible resources were being utilized. Liz realized that the statistics in these situations were disappointing. If a person isn't found in the first 24 hours, the likelihood of finding them alive quickly diminishes. especially since there could be injuries incompatible with life under the snow. But the mother hoped for a miracle to the last and imagined how Mark, with his great experience, managed to find an air pocket cavity under the snow mass. As time went on, however, the search reports became more and more gloomy. By Feb. 15, the new park rescuers, military, canines, and volunteers were beginning to run out of steam. Shift after shift scoured the avalanche zone, checking the maps and the approximate path of the avalanche. They checked different layers of snow, sometimes digging to a depth of more than 3 or 4 meters, but there were no results. On the third day after the avalanche, the chances, according to experts, fell to almost zero. It became too dangerous to continue work on a full scale. On February 16th, it was decided to stop the active phase of the search for Mark Celeste. Officially, he was declared missing, and it was assumed that he died under an avalanche. Representatives of the Canadian Armed Forces issued a brief statement that Sergeant Sales most likely did not survive. At the same time, Banff Park management noted that conditions were extremely difficult, and the danger of secondary avalanches jeopardized the search parties. Many volunteers offered to stay and dig further, but experts felt it was impractical. In the spring of 2017, Banff Park attracted travelers and nature lovers as usual. The mountains and forests looked impressive and mysterious. That's when William Linsky, a 21-year-old student from Whistler, British Columbia, better known as Willie, disappeared. He was a computer programmer and student in Vancouver, preparing to finish his course and with serious plans for his future. There was nothing unusual about the Linsky family's daily life until things changed dramatically in April. On the evening of April 12th, Willie left Vancouver for Edmonton on a Greyhound bus. This fact is confirmed by surveillance video footage. This footage was the last credible evidence of his presence. The next day, he stayed at the Century Casino Hotel in Edmonton, which surprised many, as he had no acquaintances in Alberta. On April 14th, his cell phone was recorded in Calgary, but that event proved to be the last sign of his activity. The family in Whistler became very alarmed, especially his brother, who noticed that Willie had not returned. His phone stopped answering, social media and bank accounts froze. Vancouver police, after discovering that the phone signal had reached Calgary, dropped the investigation, which put the Linsky family on edge. For months, there was no information about Willie until one discovery in Banff brought him to new attention. His ID card was discovered in the cushions of a couch in the Cascade Plaza shopping center. For Willie's mother, Heather, it became a serious reason to keep looking. She drove from Whistler to Banff, hoping to find some trace of her son. The scenery and atmosphere of Banff reminded her of Whistler, and there was a suggestion that Willie might have come here. Heather talked to locals and put up posters, trying to find any information she could. However, despite her best efforts, the search was fruitless. It remained unclear whether Willie had left voluntarily to start a new life, or whether it was the result of another, darker scenario. Some speculated that he might have developed signs of schizophrenia, but people who knew him personally had not noticed any such manifestations. Others speculated that he may have traveled to meet someone from the internet, seeking new experiences. As a result, many versions never gave a concrete answer, and Willie's mother still did not know where her son was or what happened to him. The story of William Linsky remains unsolved to this day. Ralph Greenaway was a 40-year-old extreme sportsman who specialized in base jumping and had a passion for mountaineering. On August 31st, 2014, he went to Rundle Mountain in Banff Park, where he planned to make a wingsuit jump. His car was later found near the start of the trail, but Ralph himself was not found. Rescuers have not been able to determine what happened to him, and he has been officially reported missing. In almost 10 years, he has made many successful jumps, including wingsuit jumps from high cliffs in Norway and Italy. Friends often marveled at his neatness. Usually athletes who were into base jumping gave the impression of more reckless people, but Ralph always carried a notebook with him, where he described in detail the trajectories. routes for climbing, and places suitable for landing. Jessica Taylor, his friend and climbing partner, noted that it was his meticulousness and attention to detail that allowed Ralph to avoid serious injury for years. Mount Rundle in Banff Park is known for its steepness and often unpredictable wind gusts. The slopes here are made up of limestone rock that can crumble and form slippery ledges. In addition, the weather can deteriorate rapidly in late summer when the heat turns to colder temperatures. Local rangers have repeatedly warned hikers that even in seemingly favorable conditions, the mountain is fraught with danger. A sudden change in wind, unstable ground, or the onset of rain that turns to wet snow can make the descent deadly difficult. According to Jessica, Ralph had said the day before he disappeared that he wanted to make the perfect jump, flying off a steep section of Rundle Mountain and then flying smoothly in a wingsuit to a relatively flat area below. That's where he planned to land by parachute. On the morning of August 31st, he took along his standard gear: wingsuit, parachute, helmet, GPS device, and phone. He was also in the habit of making a plan in advance: where to stop to put on the wingsuit, and how to choose a point for the run-up. But as it turned out later, this time Ralph did not leave exact coordinates or detailed route notes. For what reason he broke his own rule remains unclear. By late afternoon that day, Jessica discovered that Ralph had not been in contact. Although it happens in base jumping that people turn off their phones to save battery life or to avoid distracting calls, she was alarmed that she didn't hear from him until late that night. On the morning of September 1st, several friends went looking for Ralph. His car was quickly located near the beginning of the trail leading up the slope of Rundle Mountain. The car was parked in the same spot where he had left it the day before. Inside was nothing but an empty protein bar wrapper and a water bottle. No signs of forced entry or signs of a struggle were seen near the car. The friends soon called the rescue team, which began to inspect the mountain trails. In such cases, they check old climbing routes, ledges where extreme athletes like to set up launching pads. But it was difficult to find a specific point without precise landmarks. At that time, the weather started to deteriorate. Suddenly it started to rain, and by the evening it turned to snow. It sharply worsened visibility, made rocky surfaces slippery and dangerous for rescuers. They had to move in harnesses and helmets, stopping every few minutes to avoid falling off. Most often in disappearances of base jumpers, consider the option of a parachute that failed to open or opened late, miscalculated trajectory, or hit a rock. But in Ralph's case, there were other versions. For example, he could have deliberately gone in an unknown direction, deciding to go into hiding temporarily, or started some experimental flight that he didn't tell anyone about. Others suggested that he had fallen into a crevasse and could not get out of it. The difficulty was that Mount Rundle is replete with such crevices, and crumbling rock debris often covers tracks. The hardest part began when the temperature plummeted and it snowed heavily. Although it was still officially summer on the calendar, in the mountainous regions of the Canadian Rockies, the weather can jump around. Even experienced rescuers said they didn't expect such early snowfalls. The snow that fell quickly hid any shoe tracks, parachute landing prints, or possible impact site. In addition, the high winds made it difficult for the rescue helicopters to conduct overflights. They were only able to make a few overflights, but cloud cover and precipitation prevented a thorough view of the slope. Unlike some similar stories where they found fragments of wingsuit wings or torn parachute slings, they found absolutely nothing. Dogs, specially trained to search for people by scent, tried to pick up the trail, but snow, wind, and humidity reduced their efforts to zero. Rescuers scoured every corner, but Rundle Mountain was too big and the weather too bad. By September 2nd, the search continued under very difficult conditions. People began to suffer from hypothermia, and visibility was down to a few meters in places. As the search dragged on, the team members had thoughts of a terrible outcome. There have been cases where the body of a missing base jumper was found a month or more later, and the remains were in such a state of disrepair that they were difficult to identify. In the high mountains, the temperature may favor slow braking activity. If a body has fallen on rocks, it may be partially hidden under debris or ice. Predators, wolves, bears, and coyotes, can drag away fragments of equipment or the body itself. Rescuers were afraid of stumbling upon a scary picture, given that time passes and the snow could melt or shift again. Several teams of volunteers and Parks Canada representatives worked in shifts. First, they searched the main trails and neighborhoods. Then they widened the circle. They used binoculars and long lenses to see something from afar, but snowy debris and dark rocks merged into a monotonous landscape. The search participants had to struggle with emotional tension. Jessica Taylor was also among the volunteers. She admitted that she kept replaying the possible accident in her head, trying to imagine what could have gone wrong. She had nightmares of Ralph lying motionless among the rocks and ice, his parachute dangling in the wind. Every day she got up, hoping for news that he had been found alive, or at least a lead. Ralph's cell phone still gave no sign. In the mountains, there's often no stable coverage, but even a weak signal can sometimes allow you to trace your last location. This time, there was nothing to be found. Probably either the battery was dead or the phone broke on impact. In an attempt to find any clue, experts checked the logs of nearby cell towers, but found no recorded attempts to call or transmit data. As is often the case in such cases, rumors began to form. Some said that Ralph did not really intend to make a standard jump, but wanted to try a new flying technique that he had not told anyone about. Others thought that he may have decided to fake his death and go to another neighborhood. More realistic versions were that he simply miscalculated the angle of flight and collided with a rock, and then nature hid all traces. But since not even parts of the wingsuit or parachute were found, the situation was a matter of speculation. The Banff Park Rangers and police representatives started an official missing person procedure. Under Canadian law, a person is declared missing fairly quickly, but recognizing a death requires more serious evidence. Meanwhile, the search operation continued for several more days with a helicopter involved, when weather conditions allowed for takeoff. However, with each passing hour, it became more and more obvious that the chances of finding Ralph alive were slim. By September 5th, they began to talk about winding down the active phase. On the 9th day after the disappearance, the rescue team officially announced that the active phase was over. The search operations did not yield any results. Experts noted that in the conditions of Mount Rundle and the heavy snowfall, the chances of finding any traces were minimal. Relatives were told that if the weather improved, another aerial search might be conducted, but only if new information came in. In the end, no new indications came, and the search gradually came to naught. For many, it was an eerie reminder of how easily even an experienced extreme climber can disappear without a trace in the mountains when nature dictates its own conditions. And for Ralph's friends and family, a long period of uncertainty has begun. They have to live with the thought that somewhere in an inaccessible corner of Mount Rundle, his body may be in a serious condition, hidden by snow, ice, and rocks, or scattered by wild animals. This grim version of events is frightening and unsettling. Nevertheless, hope for any news, however sad, still lives in the hearts of loved ones who would rather have some specifics than endless speculation about the mysterious disappearance of an experienced base jumper. Once again, these stories remind us how thin the line between the familiar and the unfathomable mystery can be, especially when it comes to the rugged and unpredictable nature of Banff National Park. The disappearances of Sergeant Mark Sales, student William Linsky, and extreme sportsman Ralph Greenaway still raise many questions and remain unsolved mysteries to this day. What do you think might have happened to these men? Share your opinion in the comments. It's important for us to know what you think. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, as well as turn on notifications so you don't miss new episodes with mysterious stories of disappearances, which we specially select for you. Take care of yourself and your loved ones, and remember, nature always keeps more secrets than we can imagine.